Nancy Harkness Love and the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, narrated by Sasha Maggia. Nearly 80 years ago, Nancy Harkness Love became the first woman certified to fly the P-51 Mustang, an aircraft designed for and used by the U.S. Army Air Forces for fighting. But she was not a fighter pilot. Born on Valentine's Day in 1914, Nancy developed a strong interest in flying from an early age and got her pilot's license at 16, within a month of taking her first lesson. She attended Milton Academy in Massachusetts and Vassar College in New York, but she needed more. In her first year at Vassar, she was dubbed the Flying Freshman. She would rent planes from a nearby airport and earn extra cash by charging her classmates for plane rides. In 1936, Nancy married U.S. Army Air Corps Reserve officer Major Robert M. Love, and together they built up a successful company, Intercity Aviation, out of Boston. At the same time, Nancy was entering races and working as a test pilot for Gwin Air Car Company. In the spring of 1940, with World War II going on in Europe, Nancy wrote a proposal to Lieutenant Colonel Robert Olds, who was working in the Plans Division at the Air Corps headquarters. The following year, Lieutenant Colonel Olds will be tasked with creating the Air Corps Ferrying Command. Nancy wrote to Lieutenant Colonel Olds that she had nearly 50 highly qualified women pilots, each with over 1,000 hours of flying, and who could quite skillfully be employed transporting aircraft from factories to military bases, basically freeing men to fight. Lieutenant Colonel Olds submitted the proposal, but Hap Arnold rejected it, apparently on the grounds that it would not align with a promise he had already made to only employ women if they would be fully commissioned as officers. In the beginning of 1942, with the U.S. now officially in the war, Major Love was mobilized or put on active duty and assigned to the munitions building in Washington, D.C. Nancy joined her husband in D.C. and in March 1942 took a civil service job with the Operations Office of the Ferrying Command's Northeast Sector, later called the 2nd Ferrying Group Domestic Division. Nancy would fly to work every day in her own aircraft from D.C. to Baltimore. The Domestic Division was led by Colonel William H. Tunner, the namesake of the Tunner Conference Center here at USAF Africa. Colonel Tunner will redesignate this division the Ferrying Division Air Transport Command, or ATC, in April 1942. Major Love's office in D.C. was near Colonel Tunner's office, and the two men were talking one day when Nancy's piloting skills and story piqued Colonel Tunner's interest. Colonel Tunner, after all, was looking for skilled pilots. Major Love suggested that Colonel Tunner speak directly to Nancy rather than have her husband serve as a go-between, and so that's what the colonel did. Colonel Tunner's recommendation was to have these women pilots commissioned into the Women's Army Corps, or WAC, and this was also denied, so he appointed Nancy to his own staff as the executive of women pilots. Within a few months, Nancy had recruited nearly 30 women, and together they formed the new Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, or WAFs, with Nancy as the commander. They began flying from Newcastle Army Airfield in Delaware in September 1942, under the 2nd Ferrying Group. Also in September 1942, the Women's Flying Training Detachment, or WFTD, was established in Texas under Jacqueline Cochran. This is an interesting part of the story that will be shared in an upcoming episode of the series podcast. With the addition of graduates from the Women's Flying Training Detachment at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas, the number of WAFs increased significantly. We aren't there yet in this series, but by June 1943, Nancy will be commanding 4 different Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadrons: Newcastle in Delaware, Love Field in Texas, Romulus in Michigan, and Long Beach in California. By August 1943, the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron will merge with the Women's Flying Training Detachment and form a new organization, Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. Nancy Love will be named the executive for all WASP ferrying operations. Under Nancy's command, these incredible women pilots will be certified on every type of military aircraft in the entire U.S. Army Air Force's inventory. Nancy herself will be certified on 19 aircraft and be the first woman certified to fly the Douglas C-54 Skymaster, the North American B-25 Mitchell, and along with Betty Gillies, Nancy and Betty will be the first women certified to fly the B-17 Flying Fortress. And as noted at the start of the thread, Nancy is the first woman certified to fly the U.S. AAF's new fighter, the P-51 Mustang. Nancy and her husband will be simultaneously decorated for their service during World War II, with Nancy receiving the Air Medal for operational leadership in the successful training and assignment of over 300 qualified women flyers in the flying of advanced military aircraft. I have a great episode for the series podcast with Dr. Sarah Myers coming up on 8 March that talks about these amazing women, and more on this story later in the year. Thank you for joining me today. The references included in the Twitter thread presented here are linked below in the description. If you are a fan of this content, please consider subscribing to my accounts on any or all platforms, as that helps me know the content is worth the effort. Check out motheroftanks.com for details and links to all content, and don't forget the series podcast, which will feature many brilliant guests throughout the year. And stick around, this will be the best series yet.